I'm Mike Cassidy, lead storyteller at Signifyd, with the latest in our series of conversations around our Ecommerce Pulse data. Today, we're really fortunate to have with us Shelley Kohan, one of the leading thinkers in retail.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure being here with you today.
The reason I wanted to talk to you was we've posted our latest Ecommerce Pulse numbers that we've been following since late February. And I was wondering whether in looking at those numbers, you spotted anything in particular that you wanted to talk about.
Sure. What's interesting, I think, is that we have seen a little bit of a shift in interest in both beauty and fashion apparel goods recently, so in the past 3 weeks or so. But it's kind of sawtooth. It goes up and down, up and down, up and down. And, if you think about the consumer, they're very worried about spending and future spending, and the unemployment rate is high. A lot of people are being furloughed. So they're probably within their own self wanting to buy fashion goods or wanting to buy beauty goods, but, are holding back a little too. So that's probably why we're seeing kind of this sawtooth performance in both those categories. But I do think that as stores begin to reopen slowly, that we'll see, again, a more shift in, the e-commerce buying over the next 4 to 6 weeks.
Well, that's interesting. Yeah, you are touching on a couple of things I was wondering about. I mean, one thing about consumers and say confidence that I was curious about is this week we saw overall spending in e-commerce actually declined week over week by 3%, which is, unless you are those retailers, that's actually the margin, but that's not a huge number. And of course, you have to be really careful looking at 1 week's data. But I did start thinking about and getting that little sense of, I wonder how much longer this really can go on, given the overall economic picture and unemployment and a future that, honestly, in terms of economics, doesn't look that bright at the moment unless something changes.
Yeah, I definitely think that, obviously we saw a big uptick when some of those stimulus checks went out. There was a surge in spending. So while a lot of people are concerned about the future economy, they're also, not holding back 100%. They're spending a little bit of money. I think what ends up happening is when we get more news about the economy that's not favorable, the purse strings get tightened back a little bit. So when you hear about the big unemployment numbers, which came out a couple days ago, you see kind of people retracting from spending. And then we might get some positive news that the lines are flattening out and things are being more positive, then we see more spending. So I think the news and the consumers that are listening to the news, it does impact how they spend. But I do think everyone is very uncertain about how much discretionary money and spending they're going to be able to do over the next few months. And so they are being probably more cautious than they have been in the past, certainly. And we kind of see that a lot in the luxury goods sector. We have seen that in the past with the luxury goods sector. Although luxury goods this past week were up, right?
Yep. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. To your other point about stores beginning to open up, I've been curious about that too. I'm wondering overall though, what do you think? I mean, we've seen a lot of new buyers come into e-commerce. I mean, it's hard to imagine that there's anybody who's brand new, but people who are creating a habit who have not had an e-commerce habit before. Do you think all that slides back, or is there some kind of change we're going to see when the time we all can't wait for, where things are a little bit more normal?
I think you're going to see a couple major changes. One, we call it a step change, a behavioral step change. So once consumers are used to buying things online that perhaps in the past they weren't used to buying online, they have changed that behavior. And oftentimes that behavior doesn't go back to where it was previously. So we call that a step change. So all this e-commerce buying that's happening right now, especially across categories, groceries is a good example. A lot of, grocery online business was like 3%. Grocery online business has quadrupled. I think it's up as high as, 20%.
Yeah.
And so that number, when, things get a little bit better, people aren't just going to stop shopping. They're actually going to appreciate, hey, wow, this was really convenient to order groceries online. I actually can order groceries online. So there's a whole mind change. So I think that we're going to see that across many different categories where consumers may have been apprehensive about buying something online. They buy it online, it works out, they get it delivered, it's very convenient. So they're going to keep that behavior and momentum going. I think the other major change we're going to see is, so mobile payment in the past, paying with any type of mobile device or Apple Pay or, Google Pay, that has never really taken off in the US like it has in other countries. What's going to happen with mobile purchasing, whether it's on the cell phone or in-store environments, that industry is going to take off. It's been very slow because the consumer never really had a big reason to switch from taking out the credit card and paying, or, swiping through their mobile device. The same with online purchasing. I can look at it on my mobile device and then I'll just go to my computer and purchase it. Well, now we're in a different kind of time where, if I can buy it on my mobile device now and it takes it off my plate and I'm more comfortable with buying, I'm going to do that. So this whole idea of mobile purchasing is just going to skyrocket over the next couple of years. And then the whole issue with the Apple Pay and Google Pay and all those mobile choices in the in-store physical environment, those become contactless interchanges now. And so consumers are going to find that more favorable than actually going through a transaction process. So I think those are two areas where we're actually not going to go backwards in our behavior once things reopen up in a more wider scale.
Yeah, that'll be really interesting to watch, which reminds me of the Forbes piece you just had, which was really interesting, something I bet a lot of people are pretty interested in, which is what happens as people are now starting to go back to stores. Reading your piece, it sounds like the new customer experience is safety, huh? I mean, it's going to be a pretty different picture, I guess, from what we were all used to not that long ago in stores. What do you see happening there?
Yeah, well, thank you so much for your compliments on my article. Well, I think there's a couple critical things to keep in mind. One, of course, is that the customer expectation has completely changed. The shopper expectation going into a store was, we've talked about experiential retail and one-on-one and personalization, curated products, curated service. You know what? That has now taken a second seat, at least for the moment. And what shoppers are really looking for now on the top of the list is safety. Is this a safe environment for me to be in? Is the retailer practicing government mandated policies and procedures? And they also want to see that retailers are treating their employees with high regard and making sure they're safe. So all of a sudden now our environment and our shopping journey has completely changed. I think the other thing that should be kept top of mind is, as consumers are coming out and they're starting to shop in stores that are reopening, this whole consumer sentiment has changed. They're very nervous about being in a physical store, right? Their buying habits have changed a little bit. They're not spending as much money. They're not spending on certain product categories. So their whole buying mindset has changed. So as they enter into these environments, they are thinking differently. They're acting differently. It's almost like a whole new, world out there in the retail landscape. Retailers have to demonstrate that they're providing a very safe shopping environment. They have to do this visually, with signs. They have to do this, with tangible efforts like sneeze guards or masks. Some retailers are handing out masks and that type of thing. And they have to do it with audio, either in-store messaging. They can update websites with information as well. And there's also going to be a lot of information that will be taken as the shoppers in the store and interacting with the employees. So there's going to also be information shared from employees. So the consumer is just really going to be looking at a lot of these different factors. And yeah, it's changed, how we have to do business.
Well, it sounds like also that a number of these things that retailers are going to need to be doing come with costs. I mean, maybe some of them aren't huge, but I could see needing more people, either security guards or monitors or somebody. There's that, even sneeze guards. I mean, there's certain infrastructure that needs to be built up, deep cleaning and, all these different things. And at the same time, maybe you can't have as many people in your store. Maybe they don't want to spend as much time there, which means they might not be spending as much money. I never really bought the whole retail apocalypse thing, but a number of retailers were struggling a bit even before this. And it just worries me a little, it gives me a bad feeling in my stomach as to how these companies are going to do coming out of this.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you, Mike. I was never big on the retail apocalypse. I just never really bought into it. I think it's a different retail landscape. I think there's a lot of great brands and stores out there that are doing very well. But I do think it is concerning. I mean, if you said, you're going to have a business that's going to do 20% of revenue that it used to do, and oh, by the way, you're adding more cost into it, it becomes very problematic from a P&L perspective. So yeah, it's a great concern on how retailers are going to be able to get over this hurdle. But if they are not creating these safe environments and putting money into some investments to do that, they're not even going to get the 20% of the revenue. That's what, shoppers are going to be expecting. But retailers can offer other alternatives. There's a lot of curbside pickup, buy online, pick up on curbside. That's a very big trend. Live streaming has been very popular, live streaming with the customer who's not physically in the store. I think the key takeaway here is retailers really have to be able to offer an alternate way of doing commerce with the shopper, so the shopper can pick and choose which way they're most comfortable shopping with, whether it's pickup, curbside pickup, ship it, live streaming. So there's a lot of different options. Of course, I can sit here and say that, and it's all very easy to say, but even if you talk about curbside pickup, which is very big right now,
right.
There's a lot that has to go into curbside pickup. There needs to be inventory visibility. There needs to be, space that's set aside for curbside pickup. There's logistics, there's training, there's coordination of picking and getting the products ready. So there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes to make that curbside pickup very seamless.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's become one of my mini obsessions. I recently, I think it was last weekend, but doesn't everything seem like last weekend? But anyway, went to Home Depot, which is not a sponsor. We have no sponsors of the COVID-19 Pulse, but went to pick up some grass seed, and it took all of about 5 minutes. I pulled into the designated parking spot, tried to text my order, but someone came up to my car and just asked to see it, took off. A young woman who was enthusiastic, comforting, excited to be at work apparently, which is not something I can relate to. But I mean, it was a fantastic experience. I was really impressed and, heartened that, not just Home Depot, I'm sure people can figure this out and can do it well. And actually it kind of almost brings me back to something we were talking about before, which was the notion that retailers, that consumers are going to be looking for retailers to treat their employees well. And not to say that, many don't or haven't, but I really think that camaraderie is building between sales associates and consumers, that, people want to be on their side. They're doing brave work right now. And it's something to see.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing, I sat in on Target's investor call earlier when they were doing their earnings call for annual last year. And one of the biggest surprises for them was that, they put a lot of money into the digital world, into, doing pickup, curbside, all of that. They've spent a ton of money doing that. And what they found was that consumers actually doing curbside pickup. So there's always been kind of this idea that, well, if you do curbside pickup, then the customer doesn't come into the store, they spend less money. Actually, what Target found is by doing curbside pickup, Mike, just like you said, it's so convenient. They have nailed it. It is so convenient that customers are actually stopping by more. So their shopper frequency went up because customers are loving just the convenience of being able to order it, pick it up, and go. And they've also said that, and we kind of know this, but consumers that are in the stores and using their digital services, whether it's pickup or curbside, they're spending on an average transaction value significantly more than customers that don't use a multiple of different commerce channels. So it's definitely very beneficial for the consumer and for the retailer both. But I do think, this idea, not to keep talking about Target, but, I'm very active on LinkedIn, as you know,
Yeah.
and I just love, following Doug McMillon and, he's constantly on there talking about great job from this store, great job from this employee. And, it just makes, me feel really good to see a lot of those posts that he does.
Yeah, terrific. Well, we certainly are thankful for having them now. I mean, probably my grass seed wasn't the best example. It's not, not that vital perhaps, but when you think about groceries and pharmacies, some very vital services being provided. I think that's great. Well, listen, this has been fantastic. Speaking of great, I really appreciate you taking the time.
My pleasure. I'm happy to help, but you got to keep sending me your fabulous e-commerce report.
Will do. In fact, we should tell people it is at www.signifyd.com/ or if you prefer /Pulse. So thanks for the plug.